Sarah, it takes incredible courage to do what you're doing. Are you feeling brave?
That's a hard question. I'm feeling like it's necessary.
Why?
Because we're in this moment where political leaders and technology CEOs are sort of coming together, combining their forces and, compounding their strength and influence. And that has consequences for everyday people. These are products that everyone uses all the time. WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. But this is also happening at the same time as a tremendous new era in technology with artificial intelligence, the rise of China and the contest to control AI. And part of the reason I feel it's so necessary for people to understand what has been going on is that AI is a winner-take-all technology. One country, one model is going to ultimately win out. And for years, Meta's been sharing the latest technological developments directly with the Chinese Communist Party and not being upfront about it. And people deserve to know the truth.
When you first joined Facebook, what did you believe it was all about?
Oh, I thought it was about changing the world, about connecting everybody, giving the ability for people to share music and photos and, put everyone in the sort of same place on the internet. I thought it was this tremendous opportunity to have everyone who's in your life also in your digital life. Like at the time, I was living away from New Zealand, and this was like the best way for me to stay in touch and still feel like I was part of life back there.
But for you, what was the reality that you faced?
I mean, initially when I joined, it was an incredibly exciting, tremendous, changing, crazy environment. I mean, it was a chaotic group of young people trying to figure out what this technology was and what we could do and, what it meant.
Why did you want to be a part of it so badly?
I thought Facebook was going to change the world, way before it was anything, when it was still something that people just thought they were wasting time on. I thought there was, a before Facebook and an after Facebook, because once you had this powerful tool that was deployed around the world, I couldn't see the world going back. I just thought, this is going to change politics, it's going to change elections, it's going to change maps, it's going to change everything.
What did you foresee when it came to Facebook that others hadn't?
I think because I'd moved from my home country, and so I had a sense of how it would play out around the world, and because I'd worked at the United Nations, so I was I worked on technology issues there, and I could see how technology was changing the world and how that wasn't just happening country by country. That was a global shift, a global change. And I think having those two opportunities meant I could see what was coming. I could see how this was going to impact, elections. I could see how politicians were going to use that. And I thought everyone there could see that too. So I assumed this was something that they were working on. And when I went to pitch a job, because it occurred to me that maybe they weren't, I realized, oh no, that they're not thinking about this at all.
Were you shocked by that?
I was absolutely shocked. I mean, I thought there was going to be a line of incredibly talented Americans working away on these issues, figuring everything out, having a theory of the case, and that was the reason that there'd be no opportunity for me to be part of the company.
What did your job involve?
So if Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg was meeting a president or a prime minister, many of those visits I would run and have responsibility for, running policy and politics across Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the Americas, Canada, and then where we interacted with, big institutions like the United Nations.
What did Mark Zuckerberg think about politics when you first met him?
Oh, he did not think about politics when I first met him. He was such an engineer back then. He was so focused on the product, on coding, on being part of the engineering side. I mean, politics and meeting politicians or presidents was the furthest thing, not only from what he was interested in, but he didn't want to do that.
So how do you change his mind? How do you convince him?
I mean, not successfully initially. I mean, there was a lot of trying and failing, taking him, taking the horse to water, getting him to meet with these politicians and travel, gone straight from college to running this giant company and hadn't had that ability to sort of travel and see the world. And we just did it in a strange way. We traveled and saw the world and also would meet the occasional president and prime minister. But so, over those meetings, he could see, I think, how people related to political leaders, how they were using his technology. And he got more and more curious about that and was wondering, what did that mean for him? What did that mean for Facebook?
Were you shocked that somebody who had created such a powerful, a superpower platform had not even thought about that idea and the impact that it would have on the global stage?
I was totally baffled. I couldn't understand how someone can invent the greatest political tool of our time and not know they've done it.
So when you're going around and you're meeting with presidents around the world, what's Mark Zuckerberg like?
He's an interesting person. He's, a very talented engineer, and he's a very focused, he's got lots of analytical questions. He's always trying to understand how do things work? How do things outside Silicon Valley work? But also you have the opportunity when you travel like that to also see the sort of more human side and how people relax and how they are when they're not in a high pressure situation. So, in many ways his off time is, playing video games, playing board games, nothing out of the ordinary.
What's he like in a social setting?
Look, I think he, is pleasant. He likes to interact. He's always got questions and is curious about things. But I think he is more comfortable and more engaged in a work setting.
How did you see Zuckerberg's attitude change about global affairs the more you travelled around and met with presidents and prime ministers?
So Mark got more and more interested. Initially, if we were meeting a president or a prime minister, he would want his briefing to be no longer than a text message. He did not want anything beyond that. And I'd come from an environment of being a diplomat where there's no way you were going to meeting a head of state with only knowing what you can fit in a text. But as he engaged more, he wanted more information. He was getting more curious about electoral systems and presidential terms and how, what did this power mean? And that happened at the same time as these presidents and prime ministers were using the product to get elected. So the first time a president said, look, I'm a Facebook president, it was an astounding moment. But over time, more and more presidents and prime ministers would say directly to us, I'm only here because of Facebook.
What did it do to Mark Zuckerberg's ego?
I think one of the things in those situations, which must be incredibly confronting to have someone say this to you, is, again, trying analytically to understand how did that happen, how were they using it, and then starting to apply the lessons that some of these presidents and prime ministers had to his own social media presence, hiring professional photographers, getting much more political photos out there, like being much more thoughtful and running his own sort of presence as if he was more of a political leader himself.
What was his reaction after Trump's win in 2016?
When Trump won, initially he was confounded by the suggestion that Facebook had played any role in that. And we were traveling on his private jet not long after the election and trying to say to him, look, Mark, you run a company that is premised on being able to influence the brand of toothpaste that people choose when they go to the supermarket. Like, if you can influence a brand of toothpaste, you can influence how people vote. And that idea was completely antithetical to how he thought about Facebook's role in politics.
Did you think he truly didn't understand it, or he didn't want to believe it?
I think he truly didn't understand it. And, on that flight, we spent hours and hours, walking through in great detail exactly the role and how Facebook plays in various elections. And, he sort of pushed back, but over time he started it. He could see the logic to it, got more and more curious, started asking more and more questions. And there was a real evolution of his thoughts on that in the course of one flight.
Did he ever see himself as a political figure?
President Obama had pulled Mark aside and spoken to him about the role that Facebook had played in the 2016 election and sort of warned him that this was going to happen again unless he did something to change it, and that Facebook had a responsibility to change what it was doing. And I think that was a real moment of reflection for Mark. I think that was a very difficult thing to hear. But as he combined his experience with all these powerful people and the warning from Obama, I think he started to think about, well, maybe there's something here. He was planning his yearly challenge. So each year he has, he used to choose, like, he would only eat meat he'd killed himself, or he would write letters to people. I mean, they changed year to year. And he was in the process of planning his next yearly challenge and started to think about, well, what if I started visiting, various states in America? And we were all very confused because he doesn't particularly like traveling and he has a very busy day job. And then, we're sort of saying, which state? And he started naming Iowa, New Hampshire, swing state after swing state. And then not long after that, the share structure that underpins Facebook an amendment was made to allow Mark to step away from the company for 2 years, but remain CEO if he wanted to pursue public service.
So you're saying Mark Zuckerberg wanted to run for president?
I'm saying he was interested in exploring the idea and went as far as to change the underlying structure of Facebook's stock to allow him to step away for 2 years for public service.
What influence do you think Facebook had on Trump's recent win?
So I'm no longer with the company, so it's really hard for me to say. I mean, what I can say is that I saw the power of the product in election around the world, no matter, whether you're talking about a tiny island nation or, one of the most powerful countries in the world. In every instance, Facebook was playing a very powerful role.
I mean, tech bros are really having a moment, aren't they? You've got Elon Musk, you've got Jeff Bezos, all within the White House.
I think we really are in this moment where political leaders and tech CEOs are combining forces, that they're strengthening their power and influence. And that really does have consequences, particularly when we're touched by politics in every part of our lives. We're touched by technology in every part of our lives. And as they come closer together, their strength and power is compounded.
What's the danger when all of that power comes together, but yet the intentions are not sincere?
Look, I think there's a lot that we don't understand about what these companies do, but what became apparent to me from my experience is that when this harm is known, you want to trust that the people in charge are going to take responsibility. They're going to take accountability. If they know they're causing harm, they're going to fix it. And that's not what I saw.
For all its global domination, there is one market that Facebook has failed to crack: China.
That has been Mark's white whale. That is, the the final frontier in his mind.
Why is Facebook so desperate to operate in China?
Last year, without even being in the China market, Meta made over $18 billion from China. This is an incredibly important market to Facebook today. It underpins the value of the company and it underpins the future growth of the company. 2 years ago, China was worth $7 billion to Meta. So it is doubling in a very short amount of time. That is the growth trajectory for the company. And yet people seem to operate under the assumption that Meta is not having any financial benefit from China.
What would happen to Meta if it was to operate in China?
So it's an incredibly, valuable market to Meta across so many of its products, with, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, its virtual reality play, its AI play. I mean, it's got many different products that would benefit from being in the Chinese market.
Does it irritate Mark Zuckerberg?
I mean, this has been a constant frustration. That's why I say it's this white whale. It's this top, it's been a priority of his for a long time. It is something that when I was at the company, he poured so much of his effort, his attention, so much money, so much time, traveling to Beijing, always thinking about how this could be done. And yet that was never acknowledged as the thing that was obsessing him.
What would it mean for his company if he was to enter that market?
It would obviously expand its value and its power. And I think, one of the things that initially one of the initial ways he thought about it was that maybe Instagram would be the Facebook of China. I think that was a very big opportunity and part of the reason for having Instagram as part of Meta was that there might be other ways within this broader family of products to get into the Chinese market.
Did you share that same desperation and vision to get into China when you worked at Meta?
No. I mean, I saw the product as living by the principles that Mark himself had said. I thought it was, a place of free expression, of, open dialogue. And I thought that was antithetical to how it could operate in China. I never understood how you could have a powerful political technology like the technologies that we worked on at Meta operating in an authoritarian regime that doesn't want, political freedom and information flowing.
Did you raise those concerns?
Yes, and it was part of the reason that I avoided working in this area for so long and focused on other parts of the world.
What concessions was Zuckerberg willing to make in order to operate and get into China?
He was willing to meet the specifications of the Chinese Communist Party, including their very specific content moderation demands.
And when other countries asked for the same concessions, what was his reaction?
Absolutely not. There are so many times that governments would come to us, not just on the question of censorship, although often on the question of censorship, and say, can you store data in our country? Can you show us how facial recognition works? Can you show us how photo tagging works? Can you take down this activist's profile? We don't like what he's saying. It's difficult for the government. And in all of those instances, we would say, no, I'm sorry, we can't show you how photo tagging works behind the scenes. We can't sit you down with our engineering team. That's technology that is known only to us. We're happy to explain it, but we're not going to show you behind the scenes. And yet, with the Chinese Communist Party, it was just pulling back the curtain, giving them these detailed briefings, giving them the latest, whether that's on, artificial intelligence or infrastructure, like how you build the infrastructure to support the internet. It was very much trying to meet every request that the Chinese Communist Party.
But how would he think he was ever going to get away with that?
He really believed that Meta was going to get into China. He really believed that by making these concessions, he would show them his commitment to getting into this market.
Mark Zuckerberg got up in 2018. He appeared before the US Congress. What did you think of his testimony?
I was very surprised because I thought that at the moment, a body like the US Congress wants to understand what has gone on between one of the most powerful companies in the world and its strategic rival, that would be a moment where the company would be upfront.
And instead?
And instead, there was a real approach of trying to not just share the information that they knew.
President Xi visits Microsoft. This is one of those moments that it's concerning, but it also made me laugh somewhat. You organise a handshake, so Mark Zuckerberg's not invited to this meeting. So what happened there?
He's made to sit out from the meeting from Microsoft, and that was a real blow because the company had been putting so much effort into making sure President Xi's visit to the United States was a success. It had worked directly with President Xi's social media team, giving them every trick in the book. It had helped them build a Facebook page called President Xi's Visit, which is actually still operational. It's called Xi's Moments. And surprisingly, it has 13 million followers, and every few hours, even now, it is pushing out CCP propaganda, and it does it very, very beautifully. It uses all of that training that Meta has provided to help promote President Xi's page and the CCP's propaganda. And so the expectation was that this would culminate in a handshake. And people were desperate to use this as a symbol, that this was the handshake that everyone at Meta thought was going to be.
The golden handshake.
The golden handshake, you're coming into the country, this is your moment. And so they were very quick to post a photo of the handshake on Mark's Facebook page. And what they didn't realize until far too late is that it's a real breach of protocol to post the back of someone's head in Chinese culture, which is exactly what they did. The focus of the photo was, of course, on Mark. And as they were on their private jet going to their next engagement, there were these desperate calls of, do we take the photo down? Do we leave it up? Do we continue? But it was too late. They were very aware of the Streisand effect, that if they took it down, it was going to have more impact than if they left it up.
What's it like spending so long together on his private jet?
Well, it's a lot harder because, he doesn't watch movies, he doesn't watch TV. That's just 16 hours of hanging out. And the way that he likes to pass time is, board games and chatting. And it took me a while to learn that the expectation when you play a board game with Mark is not that you will just play. The expectation is that you will play and Mark will win.
Did he know that? People were letting him win?
I think when you're in a position like Mark is, when you're surrounded by people who are there to ensure that you're successful in every moment of what you're doing, I think it can be hard to know the difference between what is real and what people are doing to try and help you be successful.
So it didn't matter how he won, it just mattered that he won. It didn't matter how he got there.
Dimity, that is true of so many things about Meta. It doesn't matter how they win, it just matters that they get there.
What were you told to do when it came to capturing that younger audience?
So that younger audience, 13 to 17-year-olds, is incredibly valuable to Meta. That's an audience that advertisers really want to be able to reach. And Meta, with Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook, is a really great place for advertisers to reach teenagers. And so the company is always trying to push further and further in the tools it develops to meet what advertisers want, to meet those needs. One of the things that I learned while I was there was that, so they developed up the ability to be able to target a teenager when they're feeling worthless and let advertisers know that information so that they can target an ad. So to give you an example, if a 13-year-old girl deletes a selfie, she looks at the selfie and she's like, I don't actually want this on my Insta. I don't feel great about it. That's information that the company was able to take, and they were able to provide that as research to a beauty advertiser. Because to that beauty advertiser, they know that the moment that teen girl is feeling worthless is a really good time, from their perspective, to serve them a beauty advertisement. And that makes me feel sick. And the other thing that surprises me, and I was very shocked during my time in Silicon Valley, is how few of the executives allowed their teens to use the products. So to me, that tells me that they know.
Who ever thought that that would be a good idea with any sort of moral compass?
That was, the questions that when I learned about it, I was exchanging with my team. It's like, how could this be the case? How can it be that you want to target young mothers or teenagers feeling worthless? I mean, this is one of the most valuable companies in the world. They have so much money. They don't need any more. They don't need to do.
But what would they say when you asked those questions?
So when I had the discussions, the business side felt like this was a real secret sauce, a real, the sort of thing that they wanted actually all of their advertisers to know that they could do. So to them, any concerns that we had seemed to fundamentally not understand the business that Meta is in.
It's just business at all costs.
As you said, Dimity, it's winning, it doesn't matter how.
What about at the Senate hearing when Mark Zuckerberg gets up and turns around and apologises to all the families holding pictures of their dead children? How did that sit with you?
I found that really hard. Some people believe that. They believe that apology.
Do you think he was genuine that day?
I think it's hard to square the actions that this company does, the actions that Meta takes. I think you always learn a lot more by what people do rather than what they say.
That's just blatantly irresponsible. Like, how on anybody's watch could you sit there and work for a company that is doing that?
Oh, it was very shortly after learning about this that my time at Meta ended. I think it's one of those places where it's like a frog in boiling water. Things are getting worse and worse and worse, and it's very hard in such an intense environment to understand the fullness of what is really going on.
It's just dangerous.
I completely agree.
Australia, though, has taken quite a stance on this. Where do you see Australia when it comes to fixing this problem?
Look, I think Australia's been really courageous in many of the initiatives that they've taken. It's quite remarkable what multiple Australian governments have been prepared to do to take on Meta and to take on this really powerful company in a way that few governments around the world have. And I think Australians should be really proud of that.
What were your first impressions of Sheryl Sandberg?
Oh, I was so excited to be part of the Lean In workplace. I joined as a young person, but I became a parent while I was at Meta, and I couldn't think of a better place to become a parent.
Why do you think you were so driven to just serve this company?
Because it felt like being part of history. It felt like, it could change how the world operates. And I felt like there was an opportunity to make it the best it could be. What I experienced in the Lean In workplace was this idea of commitment to work, do as much as you can before you have a family, the whole don't leave before you leave, speak up. It was very much focused on, pushing work and, doing everything that you could in your career.
It really became a Bible, in essence, of corporate culture, didn't it?
I think it did. I think it had a profound impact on many people, and I think many people, followed that advice.
Is Cheryl genuine?
Look, I think that's a question for Cheryl. I think one of the challenges that I found as I sought to apply the Lean-In principles in the workplace is that it's just a really difficult way to be a working parent. And what I hope is that over time, other ways of being a working parent are thought about and developed.
Some of her behaviour that you describe on the private jet is just plain weird.
It was definitely an uncomfortable experience, and when you're traveling around and flying on private jets, weird things happen. But for me, I felt like I just don't think it's a reasonable ask to have to get into bed with your boss. It doesn't matter who that boss is.
How did that play out? Just sum it up. What happened?
So we were coming back from a work trip and churning through work, and I hadn't been on a private jet before I joined this company, so I didn't know. I mean, one of the things I learned is that in private jets, there's often a bedroom for the principal at the back of the jet.
What did Cheryl ask you?
She asked me to come to bed with her, and that wasn't something I felt comfortable doing. I just think that you should not get into bed with your boss unless you want to, which in this case I did not.
That's just bizarre. On the jet.
Correct, on the jet. This is a company where the lines often blurred. People traveled together a lot. It was a really intense work environment. There were a lot of weird and, inappropriate workplace antics at the company. And I think it's part of this broader thing at Meta where the people at the top have so much power. It's about giving them what they want.
Let's talk about Joel Kaplan.
So Joel is the Chief Global Affairs Officer at Meta.
And he was your boss?
He was my boss, yes.
What sort of boss was he?
I mean, he was someone who came into global affairs without a lot of experience internationally. He's a Republican politician. He worked for President Bush. He clerked for Justice Scalia. He's very much a Republican Washington, D.C. insider.
How did he treat you?
I mean, my experience with Joel was a mix of things because we worked together for many, many years and we traveled together. And similar to Mark, I felt like in many of our travels, we were going to places and having experiences he'd never had. He'd been very focused on, living his Washington, D.C. life.
When did he cross the professional boundary?
So I think there were multiple times where, little things would happen that fell off or weren't right, and it just sort of escalated.
When you're on maternity leave, what was his contact with you? Were you ever left alone on maternity leave?
No, I was asked. I mean, I had been very sick following the birth of my second child, and was surprised when I kept getting requests for, meetings, including, a regular one-on-one meeting with my boss every week during my maternity leave. And on my first day back, he raised concerns and said, look, there was a real sense that while you were on maternity leave, you weren't very responsive. And I said to him, look, Joel, I was in a coma. I was in hospital in a coma. He said, well, the general sense is that you weren't as responsive as you should have been.
What are you thinking at that moment?
At that, I was crushed. I was, I'd been through a difficult experience and was really excited to come back to work and in, a place where I'd been having amazing opportunities and, a high performer. And it was a really, was excited to get back. So that was hard. But again, many people have an experience of having to transition back, and it's very difficult.
The other example in the book was when I think you were delivering your first child. You're in the delivery suite and you're emailing.
Yeah, I'm really embarrassed about that. But at the time, I was still trying to figure out how to, embody the lean in workplace. And, there's a saying within lean in, don't leave before you leave. Like, do everything you can before you have your child. And I guess I just was trying to figure out where the line is on before you have your child.
Did you feel so indebted to the company, though, that, you're in the birthing suite and you're giving birth and you're still sending emails?
But I did feel indebted to the company. I felt like they'd given me this opportunity on this job I pitched that they didn't want. And, I felt like I was always striving to prove like what I could do and the value that I could bring.
What did your last day look like when you were fired?
I talk about it in the book. I'm very open about everything that happened. And the way I describe it is after all of these experiences and seeing all of these, harrowing things, it was almost like a quick euthanasia. It was a, quick, clinical, and in some ways a relief, because I'd been trying so hard to fix so many of these problems and carrying the weight and responsibility, because I felt like others weren't carrying the weight and responsibility of what this company Meta was doing. So there was a strange sense of relief.
Well, on the day that you left, like you were called into your performance review. What was said to you?
It was a very perfunctory meeting, just explaining that was the end of my time at Meta. And, very quickly left, and before I knew it, that was the last time I saw the company.
Did you fight it?
No. I mean, I realized at that point that if I wanted to make change, I was going to have to do it outside the company.
Facebook has come out saying that it got rid of you for toxic behaviour after you made misleading and unfounded allegations of harassment. How do you respond to that?
Look, I think it's really disappointing, but not surprising that, Meta's trying to smear me rather than answer and deal with these questions of accountability for the damage and harm it's done. I'm very open and transparent and set all of this out in the book. It's true, and, people are welcome to read it. But I do worry that these statements are meant to distract us from big issues like China, vulnerable teens, and the issues that they're not responding on.
The company's also come out and said it's going to launch legal action. Are you worried?
Again, I think it's disappointing that a company that purports to be the freedom of expression company that has, made all these public statements about how it, does not believe in silencing people, or it is now saying that it's going to take legal action. And that's, raises a lot of questions for the company that they should answer.
Do you still have Facebook?
I do, yeah. I mean, one of the only ways my 96-year-old grandmother communicates is via Facebook video, and to do away with that would mean doing away with my chats with her.
Even though you know what you've seen, what you've witnessed, and the harm that you say it can do, you're still on Facebook. It shows the power of it, doesn't it?
I think there are so many questions about power and about this company, and conversations that we need to start having.